These are the workers who built their careers inside one of the most recognizable brands in American history. A company born in Seattle, grown in Seattle, and celebrated for decades as proof that a city and a corporation could grow up together. And now those same workers are watching layoffs roll through corporate offices, watching stores close in the neighborhoods where the brand first took root, and watching the company that once defined Seattle's identity quietly signal that Seattle may no longer be the right place to call home. Before we get into today's story, I need to be honest with you for a moment. Over 90% of people who watch these videos still haven't subscribed yet. And considering how quickly the economic landscape is changing in America right now, staying informed matters more than ever. If you enjoy these deep dives into business collapses, economic shifts, factory closures, and the real reasons companies are leaving states like California, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, and it helps this channel continue producing these in-depth reports. And before we begin, I want to hear from you. Do you think more companies will continue leaving cities like Seattle over the next few years? Let me know in the comments below. This is the story of how Seattle's political decisions, made with genuine intentions and real ideological conviction, created a business environment so costly, so unpredictable, and so structurally hostile to large employers that even the company most associated with the city's modern identity began pulling back. It is a story about minimum wage floors and tax experiments and open drug policies, and a homelessness crisis that consumed downtown blocks and drove away the foot traffic that retail businesses depend on to survive. And it is a story that matters far beyond Seattle, because what happened there is not an accident. It is a case study in what happens when a city's policy ambitions outrun its economic foundations. Most people know Starbucks the way they know the green cup and the mermaid logo. They know the pumpkin spice season and the mobile order and the drive-through line that backs into the street on a Tuesday morning. What fewer people track is the corporate infrastructure behind all of that. Starbucks is headquartered in Seattle's SoDo neighborhood, the industrial strip south of downtown, sitting between the stadiums and the waterfront. The company employs thousands of workers at that campus, in roles ranging from supply chain management to marketing to legal to the executive offices that set strategy for more than 36,000 locations worldwide. Seattle did not just give Starbucks a zip code. For decades, Starbucks gave Seattle a story about itself. The idea that a city on the far northwestern edge of the country could produce a globally dominant consumer brand, could export its coffee culture to Paris and Shanghai and Sao Paulo, was part of how Seattle understood its own ambition. Howard Schultz grew up poor in Brooklyn and built something in Seattle that became one of the most valuable restaurant brands in the world. That origin story belonged to the city as much as it belonged to the company. The relationship began changing long before the layoffs made headlines. To understand why, you have to go back to the policy decisions that Seattle made starting around 2014. Decisions that were watched closely by economists, business groups, and city governments across the country. Because Seattle was moving faster and more aggressively than almost any other American city on questions about wages, taxes, and the role of government in shaping the local economy. In 2014, Seattle became the first major American city to pass a $15 minimum wage law. The debate leading up to that vote was intense. Business groups warned of job losses and store closures. Advocates argued that workers at the bottom of the wage scale were being left behind by an economy that was generating enormous wealth for people at the top. The city council passed the ordinance, the phase-in began, and researchers started watching carefully to measure what actually happened. The University of Washington produced one of the most detailed studies of the policy's effects, and the findings were complicated. Hours worked by low-wage employees fell meaningfully in the early phase of the increase. Some of that lost hourly income offset the wage gains. The debate over what the data actually proved continued for years, but one thing was clear. Seattle had drawn a line. The city was willing to absorb economic uncertainty in pursuit of a wage floor that its political leadership believed was morally necessary. That conviction did not stop at $15. By 2025, Seattle's minimum wage had climbed well past the level that had once seemed radical. The city indexed increases to inflation, which meant the floor kept rising automatically, even in years when the broader economy was under pressure. For a company like Starbucks operating retail locations across Seattle, where rent, labor, and operating costs all compound on top of each other, the wage trajectory was not an abstraction. It was a line item that kept growing. The wage story was only the beginning. In 2018, the Seattle City Council passed what became known informally as the head tax, a per-employee tax on large businesses designed to generate revenue for homeless services and affordable housing. Amazon, which had been expanding its downtown campus aggressively throughout that period, responded almost immediately by pausing construction on a planned office tower and publicly questioning whether Seattle remained a viable location for continued investment. The political backlash was swift enough that the city council repealed the head tax just weeks after passing it. But the episode left a mark. It demonstrated that Seattle's largest employers were paying close attention to the city's policy direction, and that attention was not reassuring. Amazon did not leave Seattle over the head tax, but it did spend the years that followed systematically building out its presence in other cities. Its second headquarters landed in Arlington, Virginia, after one of the most publicized corporate location searches in American history. Its operational footprint expanded in Nashville, Phoenix, and Dallas. Seattle remained Amazon's technical headquarters, but the company's growth increasingly happened elsewhere. The head tax episode had illustrated something that large employers were already calculating privately. Seattle's political environment made long-term investment planning difficult in a way that other cities did not. Starbucks was watching all of this from its SoDo campus. The company had its own complicated relationship with Seattle's changing downtown. Beginning around 2018 and accelerating sharply through the pandemic years, Seattle's downtown core experienced a visible deterioration that became one of the most discussed urban stories in the country. Open drug use on sidewalks adjacent to retail locations, encampments that occupied public spaces for months at a time, a retail theft environment that insurance companies and loss prevention analysts began tracking as a specific regional problem. Starbucks closed multiple Seattle locations during this period, and the closures were not framed as routine business decisions. Company communications at the time specifically cited safety concerns for employees and customers, a framing that drew national attention precisely because it was coming from a company with such deep ties to the city. The numbers behind downtown Seattle's decline were significant enough that they showed up in the data that commercial real estate analysts and city budget offices were both tracking. Office vacancy rates in downtown Seattle climbed past 30% by 2024, among the highest figures recorded for any major American downtown in the post-pandemic period. When office is empty, the lunch traffic disappears. When lunch traffic disappears, the coffee shops and sandwich places and retail stores that depended on that daily footfall face a structural demand problem that has nothing to do with their own operations. For Starbucks, which had built a dense network of locations across downtown Seattle and the surrounding neighborhoods, that vacancy rate was not a statistic. It was lost revenue on a daily basis from stores that were open and staffed, but moving far fewer cups than they had been designed to serve. Then came the layoffs. In early 2025, Starbucks announced a significant reduction in its corporate workforce. The cuts targeted the Seattle headquarters directly, eliminating hundreds of positions across multiple departments. The company's new chief executive, Brian Niccol, who had been brought in from Chipotle in 2024 specifically to arrest a prolonged period of declining sales and falling customer traffic, framed the restructuring as a necessary simplification of an organization that had grown too complex and too slow. That framing was accurate as far as it went. Starbucks had genuine operational problems that predated any conversation about Seattle's policy environment. But the restructuring also included something that went beyond typical cost-cutting. The company announced that a meaningful portion of the eliminated corporate roles would not be replaced in Seattle. Some functions were being redistributed to offices in other cities. Some were simply being eliminated. And the signal embedded in that decision was clear to anyone who had been watching the company's trajectory over the preceding 3 years. Brian Niccol himself had added to that signal in a way that generated its own controversy before the layoffs were even announced. When he accepted the CEO role in 2024, Starbucks agreed to let him work primarily from Newport Beach, California, rather than relocating to Seattle. The company arranged for a corporate jet to fly him to the Seattle campus when his presence was required. The arrangement drew criticism from employees and commentators who found it tone-deaf for a company asking its retail workers to show up for physically demanding shifts in challenging store environments. But the controversy around the commute arrangement obscured something more revealing about what the arrangement actually communicated. The incoming chief executive of Seattle's most iconic company did not want to live in Seattle. Whatever his personal reasons, the symbolism was difficult to dismiss. Seattle's defenders make arguments that deserve serious engagement rather than dismissal. The city's technology sector remained one of the most productive innovation clusters in the world through 2025. Microsoft's Redmond campus continued to anchor one of the highest concentrations of software engineering talent anywhere in the country. Boeing's commercial division, despite its own serious operational difficulties during that period, maintained deep roots in the region. The University of Washington continued producing research output and graduate talent that fed both the technology industry and the broader regional economy. New business formation in Seattle and the surrounding King County area remained well above national averages. These are not trivial data points. They represent real economic activity involving real companies and real workers, and they push back against a simple narrative that Seattle had simply driven business away wholesale. The counterargument to those points is that technology and retail are different industries operating under different economic logics. A software company whose primary cost is engineering talent can absorb a higher minimum wage with minimal operational impact because minimum wage workers are a small fraction of its total payroll. A retail company whose economics depend on matching labor costs against transaction volumes in physical locations feels that same wage floor very differently. Amazon building cloud infrastructure and Starbucks serving lattes are both businesses, but they respond to the same policy environment in